Chapter 2. Valor. 1. With an excruciating measure of venerable pride, the somewhat noble men of our local VFW band played "The Army Goes Rolling Along." The snare drum had a terrible rattle, like a drumstick had punched its way through its batterhead. 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, 2 tubas, a flute, and a clarinet, all off-key. I thought it unusual how just a few years in the U.S. Army could merit such respect, especially for someone like me, even if it was displayed with such a lack of skill. The thought of it, even the sound of it, was moving. The only exception to this geriatric catastrophe, because it was humorous to me, was Mr. Browning banging his decades-old cymbals like a crazed monkey zealot, smiling from ear to ear. "At least he has rhythm," I muttered under my breath with my learned sarcasm. 2. His words echoed in my head as my thoughts drifted to my oldest and best friend, Troy Wilson. No doubt he would have said to Mr. Browning something like, "Hey, at least you got rhythm." And he would have said it with a wink and with a dripping mockery that can never be mistaken for sincerity. To know Wilson was to hate Wilson. Besides his parents, I was one of the only people I knew who were the exception to this rule. His smart and offensive mouth kept even the biggest and meanest looking for alternative ways to get to their classrooms. It would have made sense to find out that they were spending large portions of their days considering different routes of navigation, considering routes that avoided the general vicinity of Troy's locker. This was one reason I liked him. In 7th grade, he talked me into trying out for the track team, which essentially was just joining the track team, as no one was turned away, unless the annual required physical revealed a hernia or some heart issue or who knows what. At first, I was apprehensive about running without having a life-threatening reason to do so, but the case Troy had built was a solid one. Girls, Finn. Girls. I envisioned Saturdays being nothing but a day of perfect utopia, in the spring sunshine and enjoying the endless company of the opposite sex as we laid around on blankets, drinking from our juice boxes all day. There we would be, as Roman gods, with glistening pectorals peeking out from behind our tank tops, causing our blue-eyed beauties to giggle at everything we'd say. Even with my daydreams, as real as they were in my head, I'm sad to say it didn't quite work out as such. It turned out we'd just sit and stare and talk about these young beauties from our team bus, from a safe distance. We'd eat bologna sandwiches on white bread, and we'd shovel chocolate pudding from little plastic cups until it was finally time for our race, the 440, which was almost always at the end of the meet. Incidentally, about the race itself, I almost always lost, while Troy almost always won. The closest I ever got to one of those quarter-sized track and field medals was holding Troy's on the bus ride home. On one of those trips, "You can have it if you want," Troy said with a sympathetic and generous tone. I continued my admiring inspection. "Really?" I asked with surprise. No answer. I looked up to see him and Webster grinning, followed by their duet of strident laughter. Webster took the opportunity and was quickly moving toward the front of the bus to announce the hilarity of my pathetic gullibility. I turned to my friend. "You're a jerk, Wilson," I said in a governed tone, not wanting to draw more attention to myself. At least, not more than I anticipated Webster was soon to bring from the front of the bus. "I'm kidding, Barrett. Seriously, kidding. You never get one. You can have it. Honest." His face was straight, and his eyes gave me pity. While looking back down at the prize, I sensed his laughter being held back. My gullibility had won against my better judgment once again. I didn't look up this time, though. I just said, "Thanks," and stuck it in the side pocket of my bag. He laughed with a vigorous, "Ha!" I still didn't look up, playing that I'd just received a wonderful gift from a great friend. "Seriously? Dude, give it." He reached for it. I covered it with my body and enjoyed that I had the upper hand suddenly. "Give it to me, Finn." I reached up quickly in the scuffle before it got too out of hand and slid down the bus window. Then I pulled out the medal, gave it a quick glance of appreciation, and then a toss. I saw it drop and fall from left to right out of the window's view toward the back of the bus. From another seat, I heard a gasp and a chuckle. We were on a country road. It was cold outside. There was still snow on the ground, and a white blanket covered the plains. I'm sure his medal was hidden from any sight until at least a month of above-freezing temperatures found it. Maybe it's still there. "Son of a bitch! What the hell, Barrett?" He was pissed. I couldn't believe what I'd done. I shocked myself. However, I was pleased with myself. I thought it was funny, too. And so did everyone who had been paying attention to the exchange, which was most everyone on the bus, thanks to Webster's big mouth. Coach Gary, looking then through the large driver's rearview mirror, was looking back at Wilson, standing and yelling, flailing his arms about. "Sit down, Wilson," Coach yelled. "Sit." "He just threw my medal out the damn window, Coach," Wilson screeched through his red face. He was on the verge of tears. "Sit down and watch your mouth," Coach barked. Troy sat with a hard thump onto the edge of our seat, crossing his arms up high on his chest. He was mad and wouldn't talk. But that was that. 3. 15 miles to the west of Salt Creek, you'll find the slightly larger town of Oakwood, home to O'Neill Steel, South Dakota's largest aftermarket tractor parts manufacturer and distributorship incorporated. This ridiculously long tag was on all their print ads and on every radio ad they ran. And there were many. All 12 words, along with a yellow and black cartoon image of one of their manufactured parts, of which no one could identify, but looked obscene to me, found their way onto the colossal sign in front of their plant. "What a handle," my dad would say each and every time he saw their ad in print somewhere, or heard that hokey jingle on the radio. I'd shake my head with him in disappointment each time he said it. For no other reason than agreement, we had this common enemy, an enemy that had never done anything to us. It seemed that everyone in that thriving town of Oakwood, compared to us Salt Creek folks, had money. Because of this, they could afford the best facilities, best coaches, and best under-the-table recruiting deals for all of the surrounding schools' highest achievers, mostly wrestlers, football players, and track stars. Sometimes, even the academically advanced would be snaked away from surrounding school districts to help their overall grade point average. Troy happened to be one of those wanted students eventually, as he was an athlete who was extraordinarily fast. He was short, muscular, and incidentally, hairy. He entered puberty way earlier than the rest of us. This made for the daily, awkward locker room experience. Wilson knew he was a man amongst the hairless competition. Because of this, at least it seemed that way to me, he tended to take his time getting dressed after practice. Yes, he was a strange one, only I didn't know it then. During our freshman year, he had developed a reputation for himself, as it was well publicized, by him, that he was already experienced in the world of girls. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I pondered, when could he have done this? These conquests. We were always together. If I had kept a ledger on his claimed conquests, I'm sure it would have shown that he screwed half the women of Roberts County before he had hit age 15. The entire track season of our freshman year, he consistently beat juniors and seniors in the quarter-mile sprint and was doing pretty well in the 110 hurdles, and the longer and lower 220. He was sought out, and through persuading his parents, was won. The Wilson family left Salt Creek in the summer after our freshman year. All it took was his dad being offered a sweet, highly paid office job at the parts plant. His mom, around whom my voice would always seem to crack, was offered a job too, although it wasn't with the plant. It would be working in the cafeteria at Oakwood Elementary on the food line. She declined. She was all too happy to stay home before she'd drop slop for bratty kids. My mom despised Mrs. Wilson. She said it was because she didn't work and spent her days spreading gossip around town. My mom, ironically, would also say to anyone who would listen that she suspected Mrs. Wilson was seeing Tom Jennings, a much older man who managed the tellers at the only bank in town, Dakota State Bank. I thought this was a ridiculous claim, and because Mrs. Wilson played the lead role in many of my perpetual and heavily carnal daydreams, I took a little bit of an offense to the accusation. I suspected Mom knew of my cerebral perversions based on the suspicious look through the squinty eyes she gave me when I jumped to Mrs. Wilson's defense one day. I had yelled in a knee-jerk reaction to the berating of my secret love, "You're just mad because she's younger than you, and pretty." Troy was my buddy from the beginning, as early as I can remember. Our photo albums, which were always pulled out any time company was over, had nearly as many pictures of him in them as they did me. When the Wilsons moved, Troy and I would still see one another from time to time, but even then it was different and was only for as long as it would take us to climb one of the 2 grain towers. We'd shimmy onto the catwalk which connected them at the top, take in the scenery, and drink a couple of stolen, lukewarm beers that Troy had snagged from the fridge in his dad's garage. "This is great, Finn. This is what life's all about," Troy said with an air of hubris after a struggle of swallowing the foamy bitterness. I gagged on my first sip. "Great? I think the word you're looking for is putrid." "No, not putrid. Wrong word." He tapped his chin with his index finger, searching. "Gross?" I humored. "No." He leaned back against the railing, looking up as if he were trying to solve the world's hunger problem. "I'd say fantastic." "That's it," I chimed. We both laughed at our impromptu dialogue of bullshit. Then we gazed at the plains and the starry sky, and the somewhere out there where the land and sky had met. 4. It was a long school year to be a sophomore without my close friend mocking me along the way. I'd not even looked for a replacement. After Christmas break, there were a few glimpses of the friendship that once was. But because Troy had become popular at his new school with both girls and a new friend who was 16 and driving a pickup truck that was mechanically sound, time with me in Salt Creek became an apparent burden to him. His new friend, I didn't care to remember his name, seemed to be just as happy being second fiddle to Troy as I had been for so many years. Years Troy had forgotten. I suppose it was somewhat of an abusive relationship between he and I. He would insult me, I'd take it. He'd mock my inability to get a girl, and I'd take it. I'd get a good grade, and he'd say, "Who gives a shit, Barrett?" Still, I missed him, rambling on and on about the many meaningless thoughts of his mind and hollow details of his existence. From before entering kindergarten through that point in my adolescence, much of my existence had been shaped by Troy Wilson. However, I was sure that my life, my friendship, didn't affect him nearly the same. What kind of a one-sided friendship was this? I asked myself frequently. And with as many times as I asked the question, I still failed to find the answer. Or at least, I didn't want to find it. But it was likely a reflection of my weaknesses and insecurities.